Oh man. Um. All right. So this has. Oh, look at that! Fucking beautiful. Oh, it knows. It knows. So good. Yeah. I should push. I'm probably not going to push right now though. I can see the 6 commits. Wait. Actually, no. I guess I can push. I'm used to having to bring a VPN up to push, but I don't have to do that. I just have to be on the internet. So off you go. So what was I doing? I think the last time I was here, I was doing this work to return a set of objects as if they were objects on their own, although they're actually key value. Um, the reason I was doing that is because I really want to just return the first one, the initial one, and then instead of everything using keys for the change of mode, it can use actual objects. The problem with this is that it is still useful to know specifically where you are in the parser. Although I suppose it's possible that it won't matter that much, because of course I can still find out what the symbols are that are available in the parser at that point. But yeah, at the moment it's somewhat beneficial to be able to see that I'm in mode right. Although, as it happens, there's a lot of replaying and handing off, and that means that the exact part that you're in is often not very long lived. So, and of course, alphabetical order, because you know you're gonna have some kind of an order. Don't let it be random. So alphabetical, takes like an extra second to sort it out. So it's worth it. So ultimately, if I'm going to need to be changing what modes returns, or sorry, how it's dealt with, I will need to search for where it's used. Not very many places. I happen to know that base.js is where I expect to be. I guess this is an interesting one. So here we have some inheritance. That's not a surprise, there's obviously inheritance here. But obviously the problem here is that it's inheriting all of the old modes, and it's doing that so that you can just switch into them. And that's not that's not really what I want here, because if it were just returning the initial one, I wouldn't really have, well, I wouldn't at all have any of the other modes. So I would not be able to do this. So this expands parser any class, does all of its fun stuff here. So parser any class is, so strictly speaking, this is actually an abstract class, because I haven't written this in TypeScript, I don't get to say that, but this is an abstract class. This is not supposed to be instantiated directly. I mean, I can double check that, because it would be very easy to see if anything uses it. No, it doesn't. It just extends it. So it would be perfectly possible to make it so that both of the subclasses here do their own work with producing initial, and then it hands off to parser any class. I think most likely, yeah, that's a likely and I think helpful thing to do. So The problem I'll have with this, why am I exporting this? Oh no, parser class. Yes. So the problem I have is because I can't declare this as an abstract class, at least not unless I can say at abstract or something. Can I do that? Abstract? Does that work? If I just change this to whatever, something else. No red wigglies. Wait, but is it just fucking with me? Oh no, okay. No, it's not fucking with me, but this is because, in fact, there is a superclass implementation of it. So, again, because there aren't proper classes, you can't have an abstract property or an abstract method. So, yeah, that's I'm now looking at what I've got on my media bar, because this is a Mac Pro that has a media bar. It's merrily telling me that I've been recording for 6 minutes, and I've run up 141 of your Earth megabytes doing this, which means that yeah, I mean, that's, call it an eighth of call it an eighth of a gig. That means that, yeah, that would be, well, I guess it would be, I was going to say, but it would be, I mean, it would be a gig in like a total of like something like 42 minutes, I guess. That's just off the top of my head, just like randomly guessing. And yeah, a gig is a lot. It's more than I really intended. But I don't know, maybe it'll compress. So, anyway, I am going to deal with this. So we've got two choices here. Either I have something which can be called by the child classes, which isn't stupid, or I put a stub in, which is called in the parent class, but the child class can implement. I guess, given the aim here, which is that the const initial value will be will include the actual value of whatever the next mode is, it really needs to know what the next mode is in advance. And that means that it's gonna need to do this by having a separate return on the parser any class version. And from the looks of this, okay, well, I was going to say that initial is needed, but in fact, initial is not needed. So what does this actually? Oh, in fact, I can just find out. I can just hover. Oh, thank you so much for not actually telling me what that is. Super helpful of you. Yeah, I didn't really want this. I'm just going to delete this, just for now. It's going to complain further down. There you go. It's instantly red because, strictly speaking, this is no longer valid, because the child class is no longer compliant with the parent class, because I think because it includes some things which the parent class does not. Oh no, actually no. Can I just remove this? Okay. I think there probably still are problems with this, but whatever. I will merrily undo it. So yeah, we got in extends, in implements, implements next, info, initial, post extends, and pre curly. I'm just going to undo those. Right, and I know, in fact, that several of these, aren't used. So this is slightly more interesting than I'd really expected, because yeah, so that I'm not just returning a single thing. That's the problem. So if what's next, info, initial and post extends. Don't want the trade. Where's the other one? So this one just does initial and name. Okay. Right, so an initial goes into name, and then name goes into info. So for this one, I could return info. Yeah. This is a little bit irking because strictly speaking, I don't actually. So I don't have any use from having initial and name in super mode because both of those are guaranteed. Okay, one of those initial is guaranteed to be overridden. But well, I guess if I have name in there, it shouldn't be there. Which I do not. Okay, but initial is not of any use. So yeah. So probably for this purpose, I'd just give it a different name and not worry about what the exact type is of the superclass version. And then if I've got it fetched at the top here, then I will be able to. Sorry, no, I don't want to use name. I want to use info. If I got it at the top here, I'll be able to fetch info and branch to it there, and that would essentially solve the problem as far as that weird splatting thing is concerned. Yes, and there aren't any of these that actually go anywhere else. Or okay, yes, there is. There's this one that does pre-curly. I've got pre-curly more than once in here. More than thrice, in fact. So pre-curly is here, but it's not used here, which means that strictly speaking, it's not providing any advantage. How is open curly used here? I question myself. Yes, okay, so open curly is used quite a lot, but pre-curly itself isn't. And open curly, yes, okay, so that branches to ends. Oh, but end is a virtual symbol, so I don't actually need to worry about that. Yes, I can just copy it. And that can go into, it wasn't open curly that I was looking for, it was, what was it, open curly? No, was it open curly? Oh, look at that, so trait has it as well. No, it wasn't open curly. Which one was it? I have now forgotten. It was pre-curly, in fact. So there it is. Right, so you are not of any use here. I can see your red there, that's fine. Let's put you where you are useful. No, not here. And this one. I'm going to put you in alphabetical order, at least as far as the state handlers are concerned. So, yeah, so post curly would go in here, pre-curly rather. Look at that, pre-curly. Pre and post, why Latin like that? Right, so we've got this, which is fuck off, now no longer needed. And up here I've got this thing that I want to steal. Obviously I could have it as a property. It doesn't really matter, it's 4 lines. It's 4 lines in quite close proximity, so I'm happy to leave it where it is. Right, so there you go. So pre-curly is now in the place where pre-curly belongs. Okay, so I'm actually going to have a look at this, but I think from a quick glance, all of these are actually things that make sense. So in extends is from bare word extends, which a little bit annoying. I mean, bare word extends, it's only in one place. Yeah, that's well, whatever, it's fine. So that's for info, which obviously is fine. Implements very clearly is present here. Implements next is for where there are multiple implements statements, which obviously chains on from implements. Initial is the one that is in fact not used, and post extends. Post extends, I don't know. Is that? No, yeah, post extends is used because that would be appropriate for when extends has just been called. So yeah. So this is now slightly more appropriate. I mean, not an enormous difference really. And this actually returns a whole bunch of things which chain from info. So a future version of this could just return info itself rather than everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this inherit modes. Hopefully that won't confuse me. And I'm going to go into the child ones. Just going to place them in situ for a moment. Oh, there you go. So now I actually have proper information about those. But yes, so at the moment, since I'm not actually changing this, since I haven't actually reached the point of making that modification, I'm just going to save. Since I haven't reached the point of making that modification, I don't benefit from shifting this around. I can shift it up to the top, but I'll still need to splat it down here, and I won't gain anything from where info is used. So yeah, for now, that's going to have to stay as it is. I'm wondering if there is something I can do to convince VS Code that this is protected. Let's try this. Does it actually recognize that was protected? I'm not sure. I guess, well, there's an easy way to find out. I can declare it private. Because if it's private, you ain't getting at it. Oh, look at that. That's the good stuff. Right, okay, so I'm actually going to declare this protected. Because apparently you do know how to deal with that. Inherit modes, I guess as names go, I'm just checking this out order. I will come back to order in a second, but yeah, inherit modes. So inherit modes, in terms of having a semantic property name, yeah, I'm not convinced that that's great. You know what, I'm going to rename this. So rename symbol, I'm going to call it info modes, because that's a little bit closer to what it is. So what I was going to say regarding order is that when I'm adding methods or properties or whatever, I put them in the correct order, and if there's a class that I've created that is completely new and maybe I was a little bit lazy when I was setting it up, I would probably fix the order before I actually save it. In cases where I have an existing symbol and I refactor it to change its name, obviously that would mean that it's no longer in order. Normally, I would move it at that time. That's an interesting kind of philosophical question. Oh, so it's not philosophical, but it's an interesting question in terms of understanding what a change is, because Git doesn't understand what symbols are. It doesn't, so it knows what a rename is. If you delete a file and you create a file somewhere else, and the files are almost overwhelmingly the same, it knows that you renamed it. But for symbols in a file, it doesn't understand that. It doesn't have a sense of that, which means that if you have a commit which moves a symbol, it looks like it's a commit which added X lines and removed X lines, which is essentially not what it did. So a move in terms of information theory, or whatever you want to think of it as, is actually a very small change. It's very trivial. In fact, particularly if you're following a very specific rule, you could think of it almost as being a 1-bit change. I mean, of course, anybody who's an information theorist would just slap you in the face for suggesting that it would be such a thing. But at a very simple level, you can think of it as that, as a distinction between sorted and not sorted, and you've just set the sorted flag. So yes, it's a slightly contentious issue, the question of whether you move things when you're doing that. But for this purpose, there's only one symbol after the constructor, so I'm not going to move it. In terms of what order I use, I put all the static stuff at the top because in general, the static view of the class is one that's completely separate from everything else. You would be able to address things directly to the static view from outside, assuming visibility allows it. And the static view has no access whatsoever to the instance view, although you can still have an object that's stored in the static version, which is an instance object. Although that is a very bad idea. Don't do that. Or at least that's a bad idea, because if you have a child class, it becomes unclear exactly what you're referring to when you have a reference to a retained copy of an object. And in fact, strictly speaking, when you go into the superclass implementation of whatever the thing is, it's really overwhelmingly it's dictated by whether the superclass was actually instantiated before, whether the property was set before you got there. If it wasn't set, then you get your own property definitely. But if it was, maybe it just gets overwritten or retained or whatever. A whole complicated mess. So yes. So aside from having static things at the top, up here, there's nothing static here, but there could be. I'm not going to describe the specific order of the static ones. It's just that the static symbols are themselves in the same order as the instance symbols. So I'm not going to go into that. At the top of a class, though, I have the constructor. This is so that you can read down the class and understand what is present at each point. So if this were TypeScript, I would have property declarations above it, but it's not TypeScript, it's JavaScript. So the first place where a property has any value is right here in the constructor. So that is the order that. So I put that at the top because none of the rest of the stuff will make any sense until you get there. Strictly speaking, of course, you can use the getters while you're in the constructor. There's nothing preventing you do that, but the getter may not work correctly if the constructor hasn't finished. Obviously, it depends how you've done the constructor, but certainly on the first line of a constructor, or perhaps the line following super, anything that's completely local is virtually guaranteed to be broken. Because if you have a getter which isn't doesn't rely on local properties, then you kind of have to question whether there should be a getter there. In fact, this one doesn't look at local property values, but it does rely on the value of this. So, in fact, this one would work in this scenario because it doesn't do any introspection. It just returns something which involves this. So, following the constructor, I always get into the properties in order. If this were TypeScript, if I'd done this in TypeScript, I would put, well, again, I would have stuff above the constructor. Private first, then protected, then public. And that's, so all three of those for the properties first. And I do that, I guess it is completely, actually, no, wait, do I do that? No, I don't. See, I'm contradicting myself now. And I know this a little bit better for PHP because those are things where that is an area where I do private, protected, and public. So, yes, in fact, private properties, private methods, and then protected properties, protected methods, public properties, public methods. Mostly, this is so that you can very easily tell that you can very easily tell whether a private method is in fact using protected or whatever methods, which can be of some relevance. Mostly it's just having private values obviously means you can guarantee that no subclass has been messing around with them. But more importantly, it makes it easier to tell when protected methods are using private values and methods, and where public ones are doing the same. And yeah, that means that you've got at the bottom of each set of methods and properties, you've got the external interface. So that's something that's the way I find is the sensible way to do it. Of course, in JavaScript, unless otherwise qualified, everything's just public. So it doesn't matter. You can just use that. So variables, in any case, above methods, and that's so that, again, you tend to, if you are reading down the file, you tend to encounter the thing which you're going to use before you use it. There are cases, of course, where that comes the other way around, but mostly it's the case that that those types of data are defined before they're used. Of course, if you're thinking about the alphabetical order, again, an interesting point regarding order is that the symbols which are in order, which may be getters or obviously setters possibly, or methods, those are symbols that may be interdependent in perhaps very complicated ways. And of course, you can have a cyclic dependency that would be completely valid in the code, although it would make somebody cry probably. And it's generally a very bad idea. Don't do that. Don't create cyclic dependencies. So yes, you might find that you've got method A, which depends on method B, but method B comes after method A. So you've got a violation of the order in that case, where you have read down the file and you haven't found what you were looking for at the first opportunity. But um, to a certain extent, that's always going to happen. And a thing that I would consider to be particularly important here is that a you don't have code presentation which is affected by code structure. I guess really by the abstract syntax tree, the call tree, because that can change willy nilly. That could change at any point. You don't really want to be saying, well, now that A, so A is using B, so I'm going to put B at the top. Well, now that A isn't using B, maybe A is using C now, which is again below A. Well, now I need to move C or move A, depending on your point of view. And that's not a thing that makes sense. That's a thing that is a mess. And of course, that's why in C you have header files, because, well, I mean, although it's not overwhelmingly that simple, the purpose of having a header file full of symbols is so that you don't need to have the symbols defined in an absolutely precise order in the C file, at least as far as symbols which are private to the file are concerned. Obviously, if symbols are public, it's a slightly different matter, because the other endpoints will need to know what the name is, so that they can link to it at link time. And of course for syntax checking purposes. So yes, it's a bad idea, and it creates a mess if you're going to do that. Of course, in general, just everything in lexical order. Ideally, alphanumeric, so ignoring symbols, apart from very clear break symbols that may be in here. So if there were another word that started with function and the letter D, I would put it after it. If there was something that started with function and letter B, I would put it before it, regardless of whether that hyphen is present, because that's not something that I'm considering to be a symbol break. That's something that I'm considering to just be a word break. Whereas the slash here is a symbol break. The spacing, which you might notice here, is automatic. That's actually not my preferred spacing for these things. If I've got any number of symbols that's in a line with curlies around it, I would just have the curlies ramming up against the side, because I don't see any value in the space. But that, of course, is a thing that's of relevance to just local syntax rules. So it doesn't matter too much. You just deal with it. If the local syntax rules are you put spaces in crazy places, then you put spaces in crazy places. And in particular, if you insist on doing this because, I don't know, you're a lover of C, yeah, you could do that. But that's not something that I would choose to do, because I think that looks like a call followed by a random anonymous block, which it is not. It is very much part of the same line, in kind of the same way that if there were, let's say, an if statement with an immediately chained expression, or rather, in fact, line, as far as this is concerned, I would not put the new line at the start of the next one. I would, if I've got to have it on a different line, I would fold that fucker. So I would make it indented a little bit. Although, of course, indentation in itself is a somewhat complicated matter. So I can see now that I've had a bit more time, I can see that I'm 35 minutes in and I have 800 of your Earth megabytes. So when I guessed, what did I guess? Did I say 42 minutes? I think I did. So when I guessed 42 minutes, well, that's looking relatively reasonable. I mean, it does depend exactly what the data rate is going to be, but we shall see in a minute. I'm actually going to run this until it's at a gigabyte. Oh, look at that! You can see that I'm mousing over my icons, but you can't see the icons. Yes, so I will come back to that. This stuff, arrow functions, not strictly necessary to do an arrow function here. It's just a little bit briefer. And more importantly, there are cases where it is necessary to do an arrow function in this specific case. Now, strictly speaking, of course, you can use non-arrow functions in contexts like this and have .call or .apply used. That's valid. So the compiler may struggle a little bit more with that. I mean, I'm saying struggle. Ultimately, it will work out what you're trying to do there. But mostly the reason for avoiding that is that the syntax checker will struggle unless you actually specifically stop and say, wait a minute, no, I know what you're thinking, and no, it's not that, it's this. And actually, in particular, one of the problems that you may have, and I haven't tested this, is that if you have, so you can declare the function type with this as an argument. That's perfectly acceptable. I'll show you what that means. So that would mean you do something like type curly, thank you very much, this. So I'm thinking you can probably type, maybe you can do this. Maybe this is a thing. Oh, good grief, what's the actual, it's just part of the state change, of course. State parser cannot type correctly. Right, so there you go. So that perhaps works. So one of the interesting problems that you can have with this is that trivially you might say, well, it's a parser any class, which is fine. That's a syntactically valid way to put it. But the problem that you have is that in here, the parser actually no longer knows anything about what happened further up. So if I'd already done a test on whether body is undefined, let's say, I mean, here I'm assigning to it, but let's imagine that I was reading from it instead. If I had done a test above to say, yeah, I'm just going to return if the body's unset, this function would not work correctly in terms of recognizing that that's the case. Strictly, but I've just made life much more complicated by saying that. I mean, I'm going to switch it back to this because I know that is the thing. Yes, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, because this function here, even if there are guards present above, might be running on an object which is in a state which is comparable to the entry state, even if currently, at the moment I'm looking at it, it's not. This is a problem that Visual Studio Code in particular does struggle with, and obviously that means that TypeScript struggles with it, because what it actually does here is it just decompiles this, all of this nonsense, all of this JS doc, it decompiles it into TypeScript and then recompiles it, essentially running it through the compiler and the type inferer to work out what it is that you actually have. So in order to determine, let's say down here, exactly what it is that you've got. Look at that. Oh, so nice. Yes, these other things don't have this, but whatever. It doesn't matter. So yes, the problem that it has is that the values of the class are considered to be reverted to type in here. And this is a problem that you particularly will tend to see if you are doing dot for each. It's specifically that because the dot for each method, which was added for the purpose of dealing with arrays. Well, and obviously, I mean, I suppose so. Sort, for example, is another one, and filter is another one, and sum and every. Well, basically all of the array functions. So those all execute immediately, and you know that they execute immediately, and I know that they execute immediately. But Visual Studio Code is a little bit more paranoid about this stuff. So it doesn't. So as far as it's concerned, you might have overridden what array.forEach does. You might have literally written to array.prototype.forEach. And if you'd done that, yeah, you could be running that code much later. It doesn't know, and then who knows what it would be. So an interesting and kind of semi-problematic quirk is that will revert to type on these, and that means you end up with an excessive number of type guards, which is always a bit of a pain in the ass. For each itself, of course, you don't need to worry about that. You would just do so instead of blah. Oh, fucking hell! No, stop that. Blah.forEach. I'm just going to pretend that you're doing something there. Instead of doing that, oh, look at that. This is what I get for not putting semicolons in. Right, I'm just going to put a semicolon there. There we go. Well, thank you for not complaining at me too much. In fact, actually, so the ideal way to handle this actually is to bracket that. Oh, wait, no, it's not. Okay, I'll just put the semicolon back. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Right. So, yeah, you don't want to do that. You actually want to do for const x of that. There you go. And some code would go here. So, where you're doing that, it's guaranteed. The compiler will take care of it. This stuff will happen in the current context. It will happen before any code which is below here. It will all be good. Yes, it's only if you actually have a function in there that everything gets a bit screwed up. So I'm just going to delete these. On the subject of semicolons, obviously you probably would have noticed that semicolons are only actually needed where a symbol can be operated on immediately after. Yes, where a symbol can be operated on. So that means that joining operators. So if you have +1, that's even if you might be thinking of that as a unary one, that's now part of a longer expression. But as well as that, you have the symbol address syntax, I guess, and you have the call syntax, and you probably even have curlies. I mean, we can give that a quick try. Yeah. So curlies likewise are broken. I mean, I think that's so. Oh, is that broken? No, it's not broken. Oh, look at that. See, that does work. Oh, that's great. Yeah, so if you have something that looks like it's chaining onto the end of the symbol, that's what's happening. Okay, so I'm at 1 gig, 45 minutes, so I guess. And now I'm going to stop it.